An FB-3 strike drone descended below 25 m at 3:55 a.m., surging toward the sniper tower. No warning shot was fired. No gradual escalation occurred. The UAV made impact, and instantly a massive explosion followed. In a fraction of a second, internal pressure spiked past 110 pounds per square inch, tearing through the reinforced core. Stone and concrete collapsed at once. The tower fell inward, erased in one violent moment. Then it ended. Quickly the firelight faded, leaving behind an unnatural, sudden silence. What they had just lost, sensors scrambled to reclassify. Operators searched for tracks inbound that existed no longer. Positions were recalculated with error margins that exceeded 18%. Not the blast itself mattered, but its timing. An opening move. That explosion was not. It was a signal. Already set in place over the previous 45 minutes was everything that allowed it to happen. And the operation moved forward while defenders focused on what had just vanished, committed already to its next phase. The battlefield lay frozen under low fog at 2:50 a.m., reduced to just over 1 kilometer was visibility. No sound, no movement. The quiet had been engineered. In total darkness, 6 FB-3 drones waited. Disabled were indicator lights. Cooled to roughly -8 degrees Celsius were fuel lines to suppress thermal signatures. An imminent strike, nothing in the air suggested. 2 FB-1R reconnaissance drones lifted off in sequence at 2:58 a.m. below 22 m staying. Surveillance was not their task. It was calibration. Toward a ridgeline near an abandoned service road, the first FB-1R drifted. TOR M2 battery reacted within seconds. Against a decoy plume released moments earlier, a 9M331 interceptor launched and detonated. No escalation, no damage. At under 9 seconds, the response window was measured. Along a different corridor, the second FB-1R moved, parallel to high-voltage transmission towers skimming. Radar returns were distorted by electromagnetic spillover across a strip nearly 2 to 3 kilometers wide. Detection algorithms hesitated. Classification lagged. Briefly, the drone held position, then withdrew. As routine noise to Russian operators, the events registered. Resolved without consequence were minor contacts. Alert, responsive, intact, the system appeared. In reality, just exposed had been its thresholds. Both FB-1R drones were back on the ground by 3:05 a.m. Unchanged the valley looked. Active, no alarms remained. Beyond local nodes, no alerts propagated. But already captured was the essential data. Reaction timing, engagement bias, and the corridors ignored by the system. The silence returned. The approach had begun, this time it meant. Into its second phase, the operation moved at 3:10 a.m., focused not on impact, but on control. In staggered spacing of 340 to 400 m, 4 FB-3 drones lifted off. Low they flew, altitudes between 22 and 26 m holding. Deliberately their routes curved, up to 12 kilometers of extra distance, adding to synchronized arrival times. Above them, rapidly to 3000 m8 FC-12 decoys climbed. A reflector calibrated to match the radar signature of a light strike aircraft. Each carried. On Russian displays, clean, stable, and threatening, the tracks appeared. Immediately Voronezh arrays reacted. By nearly 19% across multiple sectors, reflected noise rose. High-altitude contacts were elevated by automated filters, upward widening radar corridors while deprioritizing low-level clutter. A Su-30SM patrolling roughly 80 kilometers away was redirected at 3:18 a.m. Quickly radar lock was achieved. 4 R-73 missiles were launched. Destroyed were all decoys. Decisive, the engagement looked from the control room, but none of the intercepted targets mattered. At altitude, while attention and interceptors were committed, underneath the radar envelope the FB-3 drones passed. Below 15% at their flight height, detection probability dropped to less than 1.5 m in several segments. Ground clearance narrowed. Contacts were resolved by 3:25 a.m. and downgraded were threat levels. Stable again, the system appeared. Would you have questioned the silence if you were watching those screens? Because the FB3 wave was already inside the final approach corridor as confidence returned. And about deception, what came next would no longer be. From its low-level route at 3:54 a.m., the FB3 assigned to the sniper tower broke and climbed slightly, no higher than 28 m. Less than 8 seconds its final approach lasted. No defensive flares, no warning tones, no visible interception attempt there were. Still looking elsewhere was the air defense grid. The upper structure was struck by the UAV and immediately a large explosion followed. In a fraction of a second past 112 pounds per square inch internal pressure surged. Before collapsing inward, the blast expanded outward, overwhelming the reinforced core. Designed to withstand sustained lateral force, stone and concrete lost structural integrity almost instantly. The tower did not fragment. It compressed, folded, and under the weight of collapsing mass disappeared into its own footprint. Toward the ammunition depot by 3:55 a.m., a second FB3 completed its descent. To maximize internal overpressure rather than surface ignition, its guidance package refined the impact angle. A rapid chain reaction the detonation triggered. Inside the storage area exceeded 2,250 degrees Celsius temperatures, driving more than 220 m into the air, a vertical column of heat. Each weighing over 9 tons, several rail-mounted storage units were displaced dozens of meters from their original positions. The buried fuel cache reached at 3:56 a.m., the final FB3, feeding generators beneath the complex. The surface layer was penetrated by the drone, and within the confined space it detonated. The violently vaporized fuel expanded through service tunnels and access shafts, producing a rolling underground blast that propagated off low cloud cover. The resulting light reflected and well beyond the perimeter was visible. From first impact to final detonation, TAST had less than 120 seconds. Each protected by separate defensive assumptions, 3 hardened positions were removed from the operational map almost simultaneously. Followed no coordinated defensive response. During the strike window, fragmented remained radar data, with across the entire sector fewer than 35 seconds of coherent tracking recorded. Not random was the sequence. Inside a narrow timing envelope calculated to prevent recovery between impacts, each strike landed. By the time operators attempted to reassess, already gone were the critical nodes. A new state the battlefield entered when the firelight faded. Still active were the defenses, but no longer existed the ground they were meant to protect. 3:56 a.m. In the minutes following the final detonation, into chaos the battlefield did not erupt. It went quiet. Inside the Voronezh M control cabins, radar feeds that no longer aligned with reality, operators replayed. Into short, overlapping segments, track histories fractured. Sharply classification confidence dropped, from stable margins sliding into error bands exceeding 18%. As clear inbound paths, what should have appeared dissolved into terrain echoes, atmospheric scatter, and for the entire strike window residual interference. Less than 38 seconds of coherent tracking the system logged. Not continuous, not reliable, just fragments too brief to establish vectors, too inconsistent to 2 interceptors. Immediately automated diagnostics ran. Functional were antennas. Nominal were power levels. Intact remained data links. Hardware failure nothing indicated. Yet to stabilize the picture refused. To sweep the area using thermal sensors, 2 Mi-28 helicopters were tasked. From above, only residual heat pockets they detected. At the collapsed tower cooling metal, from the ammunition site a faint plume rising, and where the fuel cache had detonated underground a lingering thermal seam. No exhaust trails, no departure corridors. Backward to a launch site, no clues pointing. Struck earlier by an FP1 are diversion. Meanwhile, the communications relay attempted to re-establish sector links. For nearly 4 minutes, operational thresholds, routing delays exceeded. Late or not at all, positional updates arrived. Active but disconnected interceptor units remained, without a unified picture operating. Analysts most what unsettled was not what failed, but what didn't. Within specification, every component functioned. Intact was the network. Standing were the defenses. Yet, as if it were blind, the system behaved. Slowly the explanation emerged. With force the strike had not overwhelmed the grid. Its frame of reference it had shifted, of seconds timing offsets, of meters altitude gaps, where algorithms expected clarity, noise injected. By the time correlation improved, to intercept nothing left there was. Operational the air defense network remained. Did not the sector it was designed to defend. For 02 AM, as settled the immediate aftermath, frame by frame analysts began reconstructing the sequence. When aligned were the logs from interceptor batteries and airborne sensors, emerged a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Not overwhelmed had been the air defense network. Redirected it had been across the full engagement window. To objects later identified as decoys, more than 70% of interceptor activity had been committed. Against targets weighing less than 5 kilograms, for high-value interceptors were launched. Over 20 minutes of fuel and attention a single Su-30SM sortie consumed, while below detection thresholds the decisive threats remained. In multiple sectors decisive proved timing discrepancies. By 0.6 to 0.9 seconds radar refresh cycles lagged. Under normal conditions small deviations, but critical when combined with low-altitude flight. By nearly 17% classification algorithms drifted, as terrain artifacts or atmospheric noise, repeatedly reassigning FB3 signatures before altogether discarding them. The error altitude assumptions compounded. Above 60 m the system prioritized targets, optimized for cruise missiles and aircraft bias. Below that boundary sharply detection probability fell, in some corridors dropping under 14%. That gap consistently the FB3 drones exploited, thresholds never exceeding long enough to be reclassified as threats. Failed no single layer. As designed each behaved, but between layers the interaction produced a cascade effect. Later misinterpretations, early confidence in successful intercepts reinforced. Once believed operators the intrusion had peaked and passed, just enough to miss what mattered the system relaxed. By the time were considered manual overrides, already complete was the strike sequence. From the data drawn the conclusion was deeply unsettling. Of firepower this was not a contest. Of understanding it was a contest. Had mapped the attacking side not only the terrain, but guiding every defensive response the logic. Entry the drones did not force. Through the spaces the system assumed were empty they moved. And in doing so, into a collection of isolated reactions they turned a complex defensive grid, on its own each correct and collectively ineffective. By the time clocks passed 4:10 AM, became clear the full shape of the operation. What had unfolded was not isolated strikes a sequence of, but spanning nearly 80 minutes from first launch to final impact a tightly controlled architecture. Without reliance on satellite navigation each FB3 drone flew. Instead more than 32,000 terrain frames per minute the OptiNav 4C guidance suite processed, continuously matching ridgelines, drainage cuts, service roads, and against a stored reference map old excavation scars. Even under heavy electronic interference, to degrade GPS reception across more than 210 kilometers strong enough, within a margin of roughly 15 centimeters the drones maintained positional accuracy. Unremarkable the hardware itself was. A converted 44 horsepower engine, weighing under 140 kilograms of composite airframe, less than 2L every 10 kilometers averaging fuel consumption. Yet rivaled systems costing orders of magnitude more the precision achieved. On the defensive side stark was the cost imbalance. In value exceeded $6 million interceptor launches, with no strategic return fuel and flight hours fighter sorties consumed. Active remained sensor arrays and command nodes, but into a coherent picture their outputs no longer aligned. Not expense most mattered, but orientation. To confront speed, altitude, and mass the defense was built. To exploit timing, geometry, and expectation the attack was built. Meters in altitude, seconds in delay small deviations, stacked until reality the system's assumptions no longer matched. Be identified could no breakthrough point because existed none. Directly the defenses the FP3 wave never challenged. Between their rules it navigated. When summarized analysts the engagement, above the rest one conclusion stood. No longer on deploying the most advanced weapon depended superiority, but as a single interconnected system on understanding the entire battlefield. In that system, not an obstacle was complexity. It was a resource. When mastered, that could dismantle defenses valued in the hundreds of millions using a fraction of that price platform's costing. When faded the last heat signatures and quiet fell the valley, was not just a damaged position what remained, but a rewritten rule book. Still powered on were the defenses, still intact the systems, yet no longer existed the ground they were meant to protect. Not about overwhelming force this operation was, about understanding timing, terrain, and decision-making better than the opponent it was. If in under an hour can reshape an entire sector low-cost precision, when these methods scale, what happens? In the comments, share your thoughts. Which moment stood out most? Tell me, and if you want to see how one calculation at a time modern warfare is being redefined, subscribe.